Welcome, everyone, to the Fantastics Insider Baseball podcast. I'm Blasi, along with Brandon Kamerman from Fantastics and InsiderBaseball.com. And we're watching live baseball games, Brandon, and not in the U.S., by the way. So that's kind of fun.
So all that time that we spent analyzing what was going on in spring training, all gone. Now all that matters is the regular season.
All right. See, that brings up a great question because we complain about this all the time on the show. If people are familiar with us, we complain about this all the time because this is a really rough time of year for us because we don't have enough in-season stats to really deal with. And so we can't dig into the statistics or analyze a little bit. We can do a little bit on quality of contact and things like that, but small sample size becomes a problem for us. So what do we do at this point? What are you doing at this point? What are things you're looking for?
Panicking. That's what I'm doing at this point.
Amen, brother.
Well, no, it's funny because I actually was kind of looking through some fab bids last night, actually. And it's like, how do I even process fab? And I always tell myself, the analyst in me says, believe in your pre-draft evaluations. And obviously you do not overvalue what happened in the first 2 days. Don't drop Rafael Devers.
Okay.
Not a drop candidate right now.
Well, I don't know. It's tempting. It's more tempting if you're here.
That's right. Well, hey,
if you watched his 8 at-bats, it's more tempting.
Hasn't been a good start for him. Hasn't been a good start for some others. And it's been a great start for, guys like Tyler Soderstrom. So, those are guys that maybe you want to evaluate in terms of fab. Yeah. So I try to say as an analyst, don't overvalue these first couple games, this first weekend, because again, your pre-draft evaluation, you put a lot more work in. At the same time, hey, we got hearts. And we got emotions, and it's easy to overreact. But I think the biggest thing is really, we here at Fantastic spend so much time with those pre-draft evaluations, right? And Anthony does such a good job with the pre-draft evaluations on our Fantastics draft software, and so it's a couple games. You gotta ease off the pedal a little bit. And so what I did was I was putting in some like kind of fab notes and probably being a little over aggressive. And then I was like, okay, back off. Just don't drop the players that you drafted for a reason.
Yeah, but there's a balance, isn't there? Because I think you're a ride the hot hand guy like I am. And so, and it's the old Bill James axiom, once a player demonstrates the skill, he owns it. And so maybe you go a little nuts from MacKenzie Gore at this point.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, fortunately for my sake, I have a lot of shares of MacKenzie Gore because I liked MacKenzie Gore pre-draft. And so that's one of those things where, yes, I mean, somebody like MacKenzie Gore, he does something like that, 13 Ks against a really good lineup in his first start. That's not something that happens by accident. And MacKenzie Gore is a good example of a guy who's flashed it, and we know we've liked what he's capable of. He just hasn't shown that consistency. That being said, some of the worries about his lack of consistency could still catch up with him, and so you got to be prepared for that. But yeah, no, a guy like MacKenzie Gore, sure. I think you jump in on, and depending on, there's been some news flow too, obviously. So, there's Zach Gallen, a guy who's on the IL for an extended period of time now. And I know Josh Lowe got hurt and evaluating his injury. So you got to make moves, and you still got to always be messing with your roster. But there are guys that sorry, I'm going off another train of thought. I was going to say also, not just the news flow of what we're hearing about injuries and things like that, but also monitoring how they're being used in the first week, right? Yep. When we weren't sure,
bullpens, right? Yeah,
bullpens and platoons, and trying to understand how they're using the platoons. There's some guys that may not have been sure going into the season exactly whether they were a platoon guy or an everyday guy. Now we may have a better idea of it, and so that could influence your decision too. I just think a guy who starts off 0 for 8, don't panic about that. Or a guy who starts off red hot, don't panic about that or over evaluate it. But yeah, we got to take what we got, right?
Right. And Soderstrom, you brought up Soderstrom, and he's an interesting point because first base, there are a lot of people in first base hell. right now because they weren't married to the players they got. They just kind of waited a little bit and get into that area of first base where, okay, I'll take this guy and see what happens. And he took some flyers on the guy. And Soderstrom has been kind of lurking underneath, and he had a good start. And that's what you have to recognize. It's not necessarily that you panic for him. It's that the market's going to panic for him. Price is going up. If you want a shot at him, you kind of got to move, right?
Yeah, and that's absolutely true. And so if you do need, and Soderstrom, kind of like MacKenzie Gore, a guy who has talent and was a good prospect, a guy he just hasn't, he's had some injuries, but also hasn't put it all together yet. So when we see him flash a little bit of that, yeah, it can get exciting because we've known that there's maybe a little more in there. So we're totally worth jumping in on a guy like him. But other people in your league also could be jumping in on a guy like him. And do you want to overspend?
Well, don't spend 50% of your fab budget on Tyler
exactly.
Soderstrom in week one. And I'm not advocating that necessarily, but
some people will.
Yeah, I know. But there's a balance point. You can jump a little bit too hard or react a little bit too strongly to early samples. But at some point, and hopefully you've diversified your roster. We talk about this all the time too, where you have a couple slots in your roster where I can ride the hot hand. I can just let's find out what that guy is while he's on my roster, as opposed to losing him to somebody else and then finding out what he becomes on another roster.
Yeah, no question about it. And then it's being willing though to let go of it, because I know, and we talk about this later in the season, is it's also easy to get attached to those great fab pickups you made, those great waiver wire pickups that you made, and they get hot for a couple weeks. You love it. You think you struck gold. Then they go back to the player they were, the reason that they weren't drafted initially, and it's hard to let go. So, you got to be willing to continue to be fluid with your lineups and your rosters. But at the same time, I just think don't overhaul your roster in week one.
Right.
That's I think the biggest thing is you drafted this roster for a reason. Maybe you like it, maybe you don't.
Yeah.
And you can, like you said, those one or two roster spots, if you want to play around with them or try to maybe strike gold with a certain player, great. But don't overhaul the roster. Don't panic about guys that you planned on being one of your regular guys and then they just started off a little cold.
We put so much emphasis on this first 4 days of games here where everybody's watching, of course, and we're looking at players, and we have a bunch of players that we were on the fence on. Soderstrom is a perfect example for me, a guy, and I claimed him last night. He's a guy who I was looking at in the preseason, would have drafted, because my thought all along was not to go big at first base and kind of piece it together going down. And I had a couple of guys at the end that I thought might be interesting to piece it together. He was one of them, but he didn't quite make my roster. I'm not sure why. But, started off hot. Yeah, sure, let's give it right, because I'm not particularly strong at first base. I don't mind getting rid of the second first baseman that I have on my roster right now.
Yeah, no, and I think that's smart. I mean, again, that's playing with the roster spot. And why wouldn't you pick up him? Why wouldn't you pick him up at this point, if that's the case? I kind of went a little bit the other way, and early in draft season just realized how, and we've talked about a lot, how thin first base position is, and it's stark. And so I started trying to target it a little early just to make sure I kind of filled that spot with guys like whether it was Freddie Freeman or going early on Vlad or Pete Alonso, stuff like that. So I am not as much in the need of Tyler Soderstrom, but I mean, if you have the roster spot, use it. And I think that's the smart way to go. And I think you should be, we talk about this all the time, be active throughout the season. And so why wouldn't you? And then, like I'm saying, you just have to be willing to say, if Tyler Soderstrom goes back to being a 220 hitter and, trending towards 19 home runs, then you drop him.
Yeah. Then you get Spencer Torkelson.
Right. Hey, Torkelson started off well as well.
Yeah. Another guy who's shown some stuff in the past and probably was on everybody's thought, but just didn't quite make the draft, just sitting around out there. And if he continues on a hot start, he's going to be highly priced too. And again, you kind of have to beat the market a little bit if you have a particular need at that position, which I know a lot of teams do.
Yeah, no question, first base. And you mentioned the bullpen too. Yeah. That's where it can get a little crazy because we're still trying to read how teams are using their bullpen. What are the Dodgers doing now? Tanner Scott blew a save, and they've got 800 closers in that bullpen. And so, do you go? I have a league where I saw Kirby Yates is available. Do you go overboard with Kirby Yates? We don't even know if he's the closer.
Yeah. Plus, there's all kinds of things going on with the bullpen early on. If they had back-to-back games at the start of the season, they're just running guys out of the bullpen to get them some innings and get them on the mound and get them pitching at this point. So what happened the first day might be more representative than what happened the second day, or game situations change. So it's really hard to get a read at this point. That's a place where you definitely where I don't think you want to overreact.
Don't want to overreact, but then if you do have or Jordan Romano, who blew a save in his first time out, more so if you have a closer that struggled. But again, that's the same sort of thing the first day, opening day, it was almost like every closer wasn't good. There was only a couple closers that had a clean inning. And so, you got to let some of this stuff play out, but it's easy to get emotional about it and to worry. That's what we do, right?
Yeah, and that's why we play the game, to get emotional about it, right?
Exactly.
All right, so you came up with the topic this week for the show, and tell me about your thinking about it. And I think it's a great topic because, again, we can't look at this year's stats and draw anything from them. Spring training wasn't really relevant when it was spring training, so we're not going back and looking at that all that much. So what did you decide to do here early on?
Yeah, I'm just looking at guys who essentially have started off the season hot throughout their careers, or recently have had strong Aprils. Essentially, is what I'm looking at. March Aprils, and it's an inexact science. A lot of these are relatively small sample sizes. I tried to weed out the ones that I noticed. Yeah, this is probably more of a sample size thing. And really highlight guys who really, it seems to be, a factor that they start off the season well. But again, it's something to look at. It's certainly not something to overvalue, but I like looking at those guys who start off hot. And there is a trend, which we can get into, something I noticed, a through line through most of these guys. And so I think it is something that it's relatively obvious, but also something that I think is worth noting.
Oh, excellent. And that's a point I want to make about analytics in general, because up here in the Boston market, I think I've mentioned it a couple of times, the afternoon show hosts hate analytics and just go at them constantly. And I think it's because people misunderstand it. And if we look at April, we try to identify players who are strong in April traditionally, and that can be just a small sample size. It can be 1 year that skews the whole sample. It's not a silver bullet. It's not an equation. It's not we're coming up with answers. It's like, well, let's look at this and see if it's real, right? And you try to look at different sample sizes to make sure that it's something that the player does, as opposed to just, again, small sample size. I hate to keep going back to it. None of the things we talk about are silver bullets. We're just looking at a puzzle and trying to fit the pieces together and try to find out what's going on. It's not a guess, but it's a way of putting pieces together and trying to figure out what's the truth here. What's the most important factor that we see? What can we see that tells us about the stats going forward? Because those are the most important stats.
And I think one thing that something like this can do is guys who've had successful Aprils in the past is if they are hot, if they're, pitching well, hitting well in April, recognizing that that's a trend for them and they dip off of that, later on. So whether that's somebody you want to trade, whether that's, somebody you want to drop, a couple of these guys are droppable, not all, most of them are not, but, however you want to play that, there are ways you can take advantage of it. Is strong April, and then maybe mid-May, you look to move them.
All right. That your through line? I'm curious about the through line.
The through line is a lot of these guys are injury prone. Not all of them.
Yep.
And so early in the season, they're probably at their healthier point. And so they wear down a little bit. So it's kind of one of those things that I think you could take advantage of get them when they're healthy, when they're feeling good, when their bodies are feeling good, and, jettison them when things maybe start to break down a little bit.
Sell high is the classic sell high, right?
Right. Yeah. And so I mean, it makes sense when you think about it, as they're healthier at the beginning of the season, and if they're prone to body aches, injuries, strain, muscle strains, that would come as the season wears on, and so you could take advantage of it early on.
You said that, and I said, I wonder if this guy's on the list. And I looked over, and yep, he's on the list.
There are a few of them, more so the hitter side, but even on the pitcher side,
Yeah.
injury prone guys as well.
Let's start with the pitchers, because that's a unique. April is a unique thing for pitchers, because and it's kind of speaks to what you talked about. You're coming out of spring training. If you've done spring training well, especially if you're a veteran, you have yourself prepared. You come out, you're as healthy as you're ever going to be. Your arm is as lively as it's ever going to be at that point. Plus, the hitters are at a disadvantage, bad weather sites, things like that. And this leads to the strategy and rotisserie where you play for pitching early in the season through, say, mid-May, and the dog days of summer are coming, and you know the offense is going to come around. So build up as many good innings, good ratio innings as you can to help offset what's going to happen in the dog days. And then, go strong in the beginning and then sell off your pitching as you get into the summer months and the ball starts to fly a little bit more. So let's start with pitching, because I think it kind of fits all that. And the first guy on your list is Zach Gallen. The second guy on your list is funny, because now this is all coming back to me, the injury guys. Let's start with Zach Gallen.
Yeah, Gallen, not so much an injury guy, but like you said, there are other guys on this list that are. Gallen has a career 2.56 ERA with a almost 30% K rate in his career in March, April. 2.56 ERA, 30% K rate. Opposing batting average against Zach Gallen throughout his career in April, 188.
Wow.
And he's had a significant career now, so this is a good size sample. His best month throughout his career in every single season, his best month far and away, except one season, 2021, was April. And it stands out. So this is a great example of, and he didn't have a good start to start, so maybe it didn't follow. But again, that start was in March, so we'll give him that.
Yeah, there we go. It doesn't count, right?
But that being said, Zach Gallen's obviously a guy who's been really consistent. I know, for fantasy owners, he's been a reliable cog for years. He's generally been healthy. He suffered a little bit and only threw 148 innings last year. But you like his reliability, the fact that he can get strikeouts and somewhat limits the walks, although those were up a little bit last year. That being said, I think this is one that's worth noting. It's stark. It is his best month far and away. And what's interesting about it is, obviously a guy who's pitching in Arizona, so it's not so much for him that is, at least in his home games, that it's the weather issue, maybe road games. But certainly somebody that just comes out the gates hot, a veteran who, like you said, probably has a pretty good routine in spring and feels comfortable, on day one. But things, not that he was bad after April, but things take a turn for sure.
Well, let's think about that. What was the ERA you came up with for his April ERA? 265?
256.
256. So over the last 3 years, his ERA for the season has been 320. So what's happening the remainder of the season?
Exactly. Yeah. And so, it's, and I had it pulled up when I was doing, I don't have it here, the splits in terms of the rest of the season, but yeah, it's got to be high threes, something along those lines, or mid to high threes.
Yep.
And so, it's still good. He's still an above average pitcher the rest of the year, but, a guy that maybe you could take advantage of if he does have string a few solid starts together in April, you could take advantage of it and maybe, find a buyer.
Exactly. And you did the key element of what we're doing today, is that you look deeply enough and throughout his career to find out that this isn't necessarily a sample size. There wasn't one good April that skewed the last 3 years, for example. It's a matter of this guy has a demonstrated ability to pitch well in April coming out of camp.
Yeah, like I said, I went through every single year of his career, and except for 2021, it was the best month in the season, every single season for him. And it wasn't even close. He far and away outperformed the rest of the months of the season. So yeah, you mentioned that initially when I was putting this list together, I had Pablo Lopez on the list, and then I realized think it was 2021. He had like a 0.2 ERA in April.
Yeah.
And it was like that just skewed the whole thing. So he had one really, really dominant April. So, kind of pulled him off the list. I tried to really identify those guys, and it wasn't one. It was a noticeable trend for them.
And he's the type of guy you would think and this is speculative because I don't know what the answer is to this, but he's the type of guy that I think would be good in April that hitters might have trouble with because hitters are behind coming out. Pitchers are ahead for a number of different reasons because they're just behind and because of bad weather and things like that. Not with Zach Gallen because he pitches in Arizona and in the West. But he's a stuff type of guy. And I would think hitters would have more trouble with stuff than velo early on.
Yeah, and he's got that knuckle curve, which coming out of spring, you haven't seen a lot of it, and it just, that's a nasty pitch.
Yeah.
And so I think, to that point is he's got a lot of pitches. He's got a really developed arsenal, a versatile arsenal, and so he can really throw things at the hitters that they just haven't seen a ton of. Remember, in spring training, pitchers are sometimes working on certain things. Right. They're not going to see the normal arsenal for every pitcher in spring training, and that includes for Zach Gallen. Is especially a veteran like him, especially when he's healthy, is he's going to be working on things in spring training, and it's not going to be his pitch mix, his normal pitch mix.
Yeah, and he's scheming hitters in the season. They're not doing that in spring training. He's doing what he needs to do, getting his pitches together and getting together what he needs to get together. He's not worried about what he's doing to the other guy at this point, especially if it's some AA kid that he's pitching against that day.
Yeah, I don't think he has a scouting report on him.
No, he's not working against him. So he's a guy, again, great strategy here. And I love the way you put this. It's like he's a guy that you might want to look at in mid-May. Maybe hopefully he's posted a great ERA like he normally does. And that's time for the sell-off. Starting to get into the summer. Somebody's going to need some pitching because somebody didn't do all that. A lot of pitchers don't do all that well in April. So somebody's going to be desperate for some pitching. He's a good guy to shop around because he does have a history that we can pin to him as part of his makeup. He has a history of tailing off after the start of the season.
Yeah, and he slipped a little bit this year in drafts. He was one of the higher tier pitchers, but his numbers dipped a little bit last year overall. He's still a really good pitcher, but strikeouts were down, walks were up a little bit, velocity was okay, but it's something where I think people maybe just he's not as exciting now that he's done it for a few years. He's still only 29 years old. Not like we're talking about an old guy here. But he slipped a little bit. And so, but I think he still has name value there. He's still, on a good team, within a good environment, an opportunity to get wins and to do well. But I think, so that's where you still can really take advantage that if he has a strong April, it's not necessarily it's coming out of nowhere. I mean, Zach Gallen's been a very good pitcher now for years. So I think you really could take advantage of some owners if he does continue to have a good April. And again, he didn't have a good start. He didn't have a good first start.
I'd watch his walk rate. His walk rate was what got him into trouble a little bit last year. Some of what got him into trouble, but I think also if you look at quality of contact, you look at some of the underlying indicators, it wasn't that far off. And it just brings us back to, and I know people get sick of this and they're rolling their eyes already, ERA is not predictable. So if you're looking at a guy with a 3.65 ERA, a lot of people weigh that way too heavily because, and I could go into the game log and I bet I'll find two games that probably skewed that ERA quite a bit.
Yeah, and I will note the walk rate, again, starting off well, the walk rate through June was right around 6%. The walk rate after June was over 10%. So that's for Gallen in 2024. So he did have walk problems. It came in the second half of the season. And so that's again where, take advantage early if he can, and he walked a bunch of guys in the first start, but again, it's one start. I'm not going to read too much into it. Let's see how he does through April, but if he is pitching well, keeping those walks down, let's remember what he did in the second half last year.
And nothing too massive in terms of bad games, but he did finish pretty well last year. He had a 5-run game in late August 30th. He had a 5-run game in early August. He had a 6-run game in mid-July. So there were a couple games in there that threw threw some of this off. He was good a lot of the time. And all it takes is, again, we've talked about a quarter of a run is what 8 runs over the course of a season long, or 25 starts or something like that. I forget what the numbers are now. But
yeah,
it doesn't take much to add a quarter run to ERA, which can turn a lot of people off. And that's basically the difference in his numbers last year.
yeah, totally. I mean, and he had an injury in June, and so missed most of June, and then he struggled after the injury. And this kind of goes to what I was saying before: is get the guy before he gets injured.
Right.
Take the stats before he gets injured.
Speaking of which, my guy Tyler Glasnow, get the guy
He's
before
got
he
some
gets injured.
injuries.
Yeah, he's an injury guy, has a history of an injury guy. So do you think his April issues are about that, or does he also have a skill set?
Well, I think one thing you can do is look, he's healthy right now.
Yep.
Use him while he's healthy, and then get rid of him before he gets injured. Now, if we could all, have a crystal ball and know exactly when he's going to get injured, that'd be great. Well, we hope he doesn't get injured at all, of course, and he has a full season of health. But we know that he has certainly had his share of injuries. But for Glasnow, career in April, 2.95 ERA, 1.10 WHIP, solid numbers. Last year, 2.72 ERA. With 53 strikeouts and 43 innings in before May started. Then he was injured in the beginning of the season, 2022, 2023. So let's go back to 2021, last time pitching in April before 2024, a 1.67 ERA with 56 Ks in 37 2/3 innings. So Glasnow, again, it's less so than Gallen that we can have this long trend because he's had a lot of injuries that he hasn't even pitched in April. But he has certainly, when available in April. And I think part of it is, again, when he's healthy, when he's starting the season, this year he had a spring training.
Yeah.
He worked his way up, so he's healthy right now. We love Glasnow stuff. I mean, that's not really ever been a question for us, is his ability to be dominant. We know, we've seen it. And if he's healthy right now, let's take advantage of it. But remember who Tyler Glasnow is and the history he has. Also, the fact that he's on the Dodgers and they have 15 starting pitchers.
Right.
And if he has, a strained pinky finger on his non-throwing hand, they'll find a way to put him on the IL for, a few weeks. And so,
injury may not cost him that last. I mean, he's thrown 120 innings in 2023, 134 innings last year. That's a good amount of innings. You want to get that extra 25, 30 innings, but that might be something that's denied to him, not necessarily because of injury, but because of caution by the Dodgers. They're going to work him. They're going to manage the staff. That's what they do because A, they can, and B, they're good at it.
Yeah, no question. I mean, the one thing you're going to get out of Tyler Glasnow is when he is out there, he's going to strike guys out. He has just been elite at that throughout his career. He's got great stuff. He, for a high strikeout guy, has done a really good job of dropping his walk rate through the years. Has kept the ball on the ground, generally speaking, in the last couple of years. So we love everything he can do. He's just got to stay on the field. And to your point, buck the trend a little bit. He hasn't been, Jacob deGrom injured. He's pitched. He's had, significant, over 100 innings. That's notable. That's fantasy worthy.
Yep.
But he just to expect that he's going to turn around and have 180 innings this year, I think you just can't bank on that.
And this is where format's important, because if you're in a rotisserie league, he's the type of guy that you get your April out of him, you get your May out of him, and then you try to sell him off, understanding that you probably got 50 of the 120 innings you're going to get out of him, which is a good chunk, and maybe you can get something in return, especially if somebody's emotional and desperate in mid-May for some pitching. But by the same token, if you're in the leagues that I play in a lot, I prefer head-to-head leagues, so that's what I play in a lot. I need Tyler Glasnow to be good in August, be healthy in August. And I have faith that the Dodgers are going to bring him along. He misses some games in June, July. No big deal for me, especially early August, especially in the dog days. Sit him down, stretch him out, get him ready for me for August. That's what I need.
Yeah, and I mean that's ultimately the thing the Dodgers are going to be trying to do. I mean, we could talk all year about the Dodgers, but they're so good that they have the ability to manage their roster in a way that other teams can't, because Dodgers are making the playoffs. I mean, almost no matter what they do with their roster, they're making the playoffs.
I know.
They've already looked phenomenal. I mean, they're just so darn good that they can manipulate things a little bit. And Tyler Glasnow is a great example. Remember, they got Ohtani coming back at some point this season. They're going to manage Sasaki's innings. They're probably even still going to manage Yamamoto's innings because, he didn't have a full season last year. Kershaw will be back at some point. I mean, they're going to manipulate that starting rotation in a lot of ways, and it's probably going to frustrate some fantasy owners, but their goal is to be ready to go in October.
I'm finding it really hard to dislike the Dodgers as much as I should. I'm finding it really hard because they're good at what they do. They're good in personnel. They're good with development. They're good with managing and managing pitching and managing players. And by the way, they spend a ton of money. So, I mean, what a combination.
No, I had a conversation with my friend the other day, and we both were not really big Dodger fans. He's an NL West fan, and doesn't like the Dodgers. I kind of couldn't stand the Dodgers for years, and
yeah, I understand it.
These days, though, I mean, you got to respect what they've done. This is a team that not only is spending a ton of money, they're developing too. I mean, their development is incredible. So they have, those big name free agents we all know. Also, a lot of their roster, though, are guys that are homegrown, which is impressive. This isn't, the old school Yankees that they weren't developing anybody, but were just buying all the big players. I mean, they're buying big players, but also developing players. Dave Roberts, a likable guy. I think he's a great man. They have so many likable guys. I mean, basically their whole roster is likable guys. Plus, they have the most interesting player in maybe the history of baseball, Shohei Ohtani. And so, I love watching the Dodgers. I do.
Yep. That's where it got with me for the Yankees for a few years at the end there, and the Paul O'Neill Yankees and the Derek Jeter Yankees and things like that. It's like I hated the Yankees at the beginning, but it's hard to hate this team. It's a bunch of good guys, right?
Yeah,
they're good and they're good guys.
That's true.
The good guys and not their dogs. And you'd love them if they were on your team. You don't like them when they're on the other team. That type of thing.
Right. Yeah. No, they're a fun team. And hey, I mean, they kind of just played this offseason like, if you won't sign this guy, we'll sign him. And that's what put that bullpen together. What a bullpen, which wasn't a negative for them last year, but it wasn't their biggest strength. And now they've just got so many options in the bullpen. So,
and we've seen so many teams that spend and they miss, and the Dodgers don't miss. They always seem to do well. And it's either a case of them always picking the right guy or being able to turn the guy into the right guy.
Right. Like. I mean, think of like Teoscar Hernandez.
Yeah.
A guy who we good player, but they sign him and he's just been awesome for them. Kind of goes sort of under the radar there because of all their other stars on their team. But man, what a great player he's been for him. That was a really smart signing. And Tommy Edman, I think, is a guy that I think he's gonna have a really nice season this year and totally under the radar. But man, what a quality player he's going to be for them.
And it's that level of judgment that makes me kind of question the whole Walker Buehler thing. I mean, I get questions in the back of my mind because seems like the type of player that the Dodgers would have gone to the wall for.
Yeah. When we've seen this before, when a team like the Dodgers lets a guy go, you got to take note of that.
And they didn't like actively let him go. They didn't just jettison him. But again, especially considering the World Series he had and in the postseason that he had, you would think that the Dodgers, if they believed in him, would have gone to the wall for him. Right. Although they were pretty stuffed at starting pitcher too. So really, it would have been a luxury.
Yeah, but they've built that team on having luxury, having the luxury of guys in the bullpen. I mean, they had to. Was it Ryan Brazier that they just kind of let go this year, coming off a year where he had like I'm going to look him up right now. I think it was like a sub-2 ERA or something like that last year.
Just a nothing reliever with the Red Sox went to the Dodgers. They turned him into something extremely useful. He was very effective for them. And then
they had to DFA him because they just literally did not have room on their 40-man roster for him. And he's a really good reliever who had a lot of success for the Dodgers last year. But, they just have too many players. And that's also where it gets interesting when we could spend all day on the Dodgers, but you talk about their farm system.
Yeah.
And this is one of the challenges I think a lot of people have had is they've got a lot of good prospects on top of all of this, but you're like, how can this guy get into this, into this lineup? But they do find ways to even, mix guys in. I mean, Andy Pages last year was a guy I kind of at the beginning of the season was like, yeah, he might be a good player. There's no way this guy has any room to make the Dodgers. Well, they found a way to do it. So they do find ways to get guys in. If you're a Dalton Rushing owner, I wouldn't be so sure that he's not going to be up and playing and being a fantasy relevant at some point this season because the Dodgers do find ways to get their guys involved.
All right, Carlos Rodón had a great first start. Apparently has a history of being good in April, but this seems to me like the poster child of don't overreact here to what's going on. Where are we fitting Carlos Rodón right now?
Yeah, another guy who's obviously had some injuries, and if you can get him while he's healthy, that's great. And he is healthy right now. He has a 2.87 career ERA with about a 29.3% strikeout rate. Opposing batting average allowed is under 200 in the month of April. He's been really successful throughout the month. Again, I think a lot of it is when he's coming out of spring training healthy, you take advantage. And you try to capitalize on it. Looked good in his first start this year. Obviously, he's battled injuries throughout his career. He's battled injuries with the Yankees, but he is coming off a solid season. And I think that Rodón is a guy that right now you ride him while he's hot, but remember that there's some danger lurking with either volatility or some injuries. Last year, started off really hot, 2.48 ERA. By June, that ERA, he had a 7.76 ERA in 26 and 2/3 innings in June. And then 4.05 ERA in July, 4.15 in August. He finished strong with a 2.2 ERA in September, but this is a guy that starts off really hot and has some volatility in the middle of the season.
Not a bad guy to ride with in terms of let's have him, let's pick our spots, let's get him up in April if he's going to be effective, if he's been effective in the past, and then pick your starts as you go forward, and then just when it's done, it's done. If it's done, it's done. But could be in the back end of your rotation where you can pick spots and find a place to make him a better pitcher than he is in the overall season.
Yeah, and whether that's targeting in the middle of the season, if you're not interested in trading him, middle of the season, if he's got some tough starts, that could be if you have the depth on your staff, a start where you bench him, where you put him on your bench. Really depends on how the makeup of your roster is.
Well, that's the important part with pitchers, right? It's where you slot them, where they are. Carlos Rodón is your fifth starter. I'm happy, perfectly happy. My third starter, no, not so much.
Yeah, and the strikeouts tend to be there regardless, which is great. But he just does have a little bit more volatility, and again, it's for him. I think probably a lot the health and also the warmer weather. He's pitched in Chicago and New York. April in both of those locations, typically not so good. But one which is an advantage to him, generally speaking. But once it gets into June, July, and it's warmer in both of those locations, that opens up the door for some of the hitters. And so that's been the bugaboo for him, is sort of the middle of the season. So if you can take advantage, great. But I know, for some people, Carlos Rodón isn't a guy that you bench. It really depends on the depth of your roster. 15-team leagues, like I can't imagine you have a deep enough pitching staff to bench Carlos Rodón. But if you're in a 10-team league and you have a little more depth at pitching, or 12-team league, possibly, July comes and he's facing the Orioles, facing the Red Sox. That might be a start where you put him on the bench.
All right, MacKenzie Gore, obviously he's the headline in the first couple days of the season, had the 13 strikeout game, new pitch, right?
Yeah. Well, and MacKenzie Gore is, as we were saying at the beginning, he's a guy that I was high on coming into the season because I just love his stuff. And I just want him to take that next step. He hasn't quite taken it, but he sure took that step in his first start. That was as dominant as of an opening day start as we typically see. But throughout his career, a 2.61 ERA. With a 33% strikeout rate in March and April.
Nice.
It really dips off after that into 4s in some cases. Some seasons that ERA post April is in the 5s. His volatility tends to come later in the season, but his strikeouts are really high at the beginning, and we again saw that in his first start this season. His CSW rate, his called and swinging strike rate, really high at the beginning of the season, and dips off after that. So the strikeouts really notably go down after March and April. And when the strikeouts go down, that often means the ratios go up.
Well, there's more contact. His contact last year, his quality of contact wasn't awful. Didn't find it. It doesn't look awful at all. And his swinging strike was kind of mediocre overall last year. So that's, I guess, what the big problem is with him. And we're going to have to watch for this year is his swing and miss, whether that starts to wean off as we get into May and into late May.
Yeah. And his quality of contact did go up in the second half of the season last year. It was much better early on, really good in March and April, along with the fact that he was striking guys out. I mean, he had his best stuff early in the season. I mean, that's clear that he had his best stuff the other night on opening day for the Nationals. And so I like Carlos Rodón, or sorry, we're still on Carlos Rodón. I like MacKenzie Gore. Like I said, I have a bunch of shares of him, but I do think this is a guy that you want to consider maybe. And again, weather also playing a factor potentially here as well, pitching in Washington. But a guy that you might want to consider once we start to get towards the middle of the season, if he continues to pitch like he did the other night, taking advantage, and he could be a real sell high candidate.
Here's one thing I'll throw in, though, and it's all speculative because a lot of this is speculative, but his 2022 innings pitched was 70 in the major leagues. In the major leagues in 2023 was 136, so he almost doubled his innings pitched there, went from 136 to 166 last year. That could be part of the reason for that drop-off, especially near the end of the season. Maybe he's stretched out to the point where he can come back with 165, 170 innings and not have, if it was fatigue, if it was just stretching him out, maybe that's not an issue this year.
Yeah, I mean, he's still young enough that these trends aren't a guarantee. And, and this could change. He's 26 years old. And so, 6 years from now, we could be having a totally different conversation and say March, April's his worst month. So it's just, going off what we see right now and then following up on what he did the other night it's worth noting. And I think for him, it's backed by a really high strikeout rate and a much better quality of contact in March and April. Both of those get dramatically worse as the season progresses in the last few years of his career, the only few years of his career.
Okay, I don't like to admit this, but I admitted it to you before the show. It's like when I saw Paul Blackburn's name on the list, I literally had is that guy still alive?
I know.
Reaction to it.
And part of it's like, why even talk about Paul Blackburn? But it is a notable split for him, his success. Now, on top of it all, Paul Blackburn's on the IL right now, so can't even get the strong April out of him. And even
there's a healthy element gone.
Yeah. I mean, even when he comes back, I mean, the chances that he's actually going to be in the rotation are slim to none. But we'll just point out what I found: career Paul Blackburn, who is a very subpar pitcher, career 4.85 ERA. That's not very good. In March, April, 2.62 career ERA, 2.13 opposing batting average allowed. In 2024, last year, he had a 3.34 ERA with a 1.09 WHIP. Finished the season with a 4.66 ERA. You can do the math. He didn't pitch in April in 2023, but in 2022, he had a 1.35 ERA with a 0.80 WHIP. So it's been notable for him. He's really performed well to begin seasons and then really crashes after that. So I'll just say, let's say if he does come back from injury and he has a few good good outings. Like I said, I can't even imagine he's going to be in the rotation, but maybe he gets a start or two if the Mets have some injuries. Don't get too high on Paul Blackburn, and don't go crazy in the fab bid.
All right, Tanner Houck kind of had a microcosm of this whole principle last night against Texas, where he pitched well for 3+ innings into the 4th inning, and then got into a little bit of trouble later on.
Yeah, and that was his first start. He's got a career 2.86 ERA in March and April 2024 as a full-time starter, 1.60 ERA, 0.92 WHIP. If you remember, everybody was all on Tanner Houck, early on last year because he was red hot. He had a 26.5% K rate, which is high for him. He's not a huge strikeout guy. So he definitely has seemed more comfortable. And I did try to parse out when he was a reliever versus when he was a starter. Only been a couple seasons he's been a full-time starter. But I thought it was really notable that even last year he really started out red hot. So it's kind of one of those things. Again, I think some of this could be weather related as well, as he gets to take advantage of the colder weather, the nastier weather in the early months of the season. But he dipped off last year. He's a guy who's had some injuries as well. And so when he's healthy, you try to take advantage, especially if you can get that high strikeout rate that he's delivered in the past in the early months. But Tanner Houck Tanner Houck actually was a guy who was going later than I expected this season.
Yeah.
As an entrenched member at this point of the Red Sox rotation. But I think the lack of strikeout upside probably turned some people off. And the fact that he has had a little bit of volatility, that he hasn't been, I don't know if anybody ever expected him to be dominant, but maybe we expected him to be a little bit better than he's been.
Yeah, we expected him to be a good number 3, and he's still capable of doing that, I think. And he did make a jump. Here's the stretch out thing again, and weather plays a part of it. He's a max effort type of guy. He went from 106 innings pitched in 2023 to 178. That's 70. It's expanding his year, 70 innings pitched. It's almost natural that he would tail off towards the end of that season at that point, because it takes a while to get stretched out. So let's see what he comes back with this year, having pitched 180 innings last year. So he's stretched out and ready to go. Maybe it won't be fatigue. You ask a pitcher to go 70 extra innings, a starting pitcher, especially the second year after he converts to a starter, I'm expecting some drop off. That's almost natural.
Yeah, and he's got an interesting pitch mix too, and he's still messing around with it, right?
Yeah.
He developed the sweeper a couple of years ago, and he used it a ton last year. And so we'll see how that continues to develop for him. Sort of a sweeper sinker. He's got the splitter guy. He wants to keep the ball on the ground. That's for certain. I think he's still developing. Look, he's really only, if you pull out the years that he was a reliever, he's really only a couple of years into his career. And we know that, when you transition from a reliever to starter, you've got to reallocate that pitch mix,
Right.
and develop the new pitches, which he is doing. And that's going to take a couple of years, right? So I think we're still in that process of Tanner Houck figuring out the type of pitcher he is.
And there's been a philosophical change in the Red Sox in their pitching development at this point, because they bought the old Yankee axiom, and we laughed at the Yankees when they did it, when they started backing off on fastballs and wanted pitchers to throw less fastballs. And the Red Sox just said it out loud last year, where it's like, well, quality contact on non-fastballs is better than it is on fastballs, so let's throw more non-fastballs. And that's great. It's a great philosophy if your pitchers can do it, if they have the breaking pitchers to do it and can mix it in effectively and locate and do all that kind of thing. And I think that's something that Tanner Houck is dealing with, or dealt with last year. Hopefully in the second year, he's more comfortable with that type of approach at the plate, because he was a max effort velocity guy, and he'd work off his fastball and then just try to fool you every once in a while with an off-speed pitch. Now the whole Red Sox development philosophy is to work the off-speed pitches in the at-bats more frequently, and more just basing it off those as opposed to basing off fastballs. In other words, get him off balance for the fastball instead of getting him off balance with the breaking pitches, get him off balance, and then throw the fastball.
Yeah, and the fact of the matter is Tanner Houck was a strikeout guy as a reliever. Now he's purely a ground ball guy. I mean, it's get the ball on the ground.
Yeah.
And, the strikeouts have come dramatically down because, to your point, it's not about throwing the ball past him. That's not what Tanner Houck's working to do.
No.
He's working to get the ball on the ground. And worth noting that the Red Sox infield defense is better with Devers at designated hitter, might I say, than it was with Devers at the hot corner. So maybe that works to Houck's advantage as well as a ground ball pitcher.
Well, his ground ball rate was up 56%. That's obviously a career high for him. Strikeout rate was down, of course, and quality of contact was down. He's controlling quality contact a little better. It's all working for him. It's just a matter of whether he can maintain it throughout the season. And we might be past the stretch out point where it's not a physical issue. It's other things going on. And hopefully, again, physical, you can't avoid. If you're going to throw 70 extra innings pitch, you're going to tail off at the end of the year, just the way it works. Hopefully we don't have that issue this year, and that's one thing we can put on the sideline and let him just deal with his stuff and get hitters out and hopefully be more consistent throughout the season. And if you can keep the ball on the ground, that's going to offset the effects of the dog days, especially in the American League East.
And he had this career low walk rate overall last year. And so keep the ball on the ground and don't walk guys, and you're going to have a successful season. And he did last year. I mean, he ended up still with a 3.12 ERA. Really a nice season. Just not a lot of for fantasy purposes. It's a nice season. He doesn't have the upside though of a top tier ace or anything remotely close to that for fantasy purposes. But
because of that strikeout rate, he's capable of other things, but just because of that strikeout rate, which isn't that's why people look at the strikeout rate and don't be fooled. He's got a low strikeout rate, but it's not because he can't strike out guys. It's because he's not trying to right now.
Mm-hmm.
What we're looking for in a guy for the ratio stats. Now you need strikeouts in rotisserie. You need strikeouts in fantasy baseball for the most part because they score points. So it's one of the counting columns. So you need strikeouts. But from a pitching standpoint, the strikeouts are just there. If you can get out of an inning, if you get into a situation where you need a punch out, can you do it? Tanner Houck can certainly do it.
Yeah, I mean, he was essentially, that's what his role was in the bullpen for a couple of years there, and he was an elite strikeout guy out of the bullpen, and he has just completely changed his approach, which is normal and probably to the Red Sox benefit, but maybe not to fantasy owners' benefit. Still felt like that's also why he was going too late, in my opinion, in drafts this year, that he was an afterthought. And I feel like this is still a guy who can deliver solid ratios for you. And he didn't do it last year. It was 9 and 10. The Red Sox are better this year. They have a better offense. We cannot buy, it's hard to figure out wins, but I don't expect him to go 9 and 10 again this year. I think he has the potential to pick up some wins, especially if he can throw another 180 innings.
But as I say that, the strikeout rate is kind of daunting, and his swinging strike is sub 10. That's kind of daunting. That's not what I'm looking for. The next thing I look for, if I'm looking at that guy, is I look at the ground ball rate, and the ground ball rate is accessible, is good. Keep the ball on the ground, don't walk anybody, and I can put up with lesser strikeouts. But he's not a guy I'm looking for in the top half of my rotation, and he's not a guy I'm starting every start.
No, he's a streaming option for sure, and a deeper league guy. Yeah, he's borderline rosterable in like 10-team leagues, but once you get past that streaming guy and then deeper leagues or AL only leagues, I think he's a really quality guy to have on your roster.
Okay, I had Freddie Peralta on my house league team last year, and I don't remember him having a good April or a good any month last year. So explain this to me.
Freddie Peralta did have a good April last year. 3.21 ERA, 171 opposing batting average. He had 45 strikeouts and 33 2/3 innings. A really nice April last year. In his career, strikeout rate's really high in April, 32% K rate. He's allowed 205 opposing batting average, a 1.12 whip. It has been a really good month for him. In 2023 it was good, not as good, but still 3.77 ERA, which I know doesn't jump off the page for people, but 229 opposing batting average. He had 31 strikeouts in less than 29 innings. So, he's this one isn't as stark as some of the others, but it has been a better month for him. He looked good in his first start with, and certainly in terms of strikeouts as well, as he had 8 strikeouts in 5 innings, only walked 1 in his first start. So think Freddie Peralta is a guy who generally does do better in the early months of the season, but it's not quite as stark as the other ones. What Freddie Peralta has done really well throughout his career is limit hard contact, limit good quality contact, which is important because he's a fly ball pitcher. So if he's giving up hard contact, that's a lot of home runs. He's managed to somewhat limit the home runs despite being a fly ball pitcher. And you still get good strikeout numbers. They've been elite strikeout numbers. I don't think you can expect elite, but I think you can expect good, above average.
Yeah, I mean, I'm biased. I had a bad year with him last year, but that's my impression of it anyway. And it's a matter of slotting him. I had him slotted too high. I was depending too much on him. At the price you have to get him, though, you kind of have to slot him high, which kind of turns me off on him. If I could get him at a better price and get him as my number 3, for example, perfectly happy with him as a number 3.
Yeah, and it's hard to get him there, though.
Yeah, exactly.
Unless you're in a shallow league. He's going more as a number 1 or 2. I mean, 1 is a little bit of a stretch, but certainly more of a number 2 pitcher. And that's the thing, is ultimately he doesn't give up his quality contact's really good, generally speaking. That being said, he does give up a lot of fly balls in a home run ballpark.
He gives up homers. Yeah, he walks guys and he gives up homers, and that makes him volatile.
Yeah, he's given up 26 homers in each of the last 2 seasons. So that's a lot. And ultimately, that's where the volatility comes in and why you can't expect the ERA to be anything better than it's been. I mean, he still ended up with a 3.68 ERA, which is solid last year. Struck out about 27.6% of guys. That's good. That's more than 10 per inning. 200 strikeouts each of the last 2 seasons. And so, those are good numbers. They're not ace numbers, though. They're the 3.68 ERA. It's
back to the 3 pillars. He can strike out guys, and he can strike out guys. But if you're going to walk guys and you're going to give up homers, you're going to have some bad outings, and it's going to be tough.
Yeah, and that's what you're dealing with him. I think he's going to have some really good outings.
Oh yeah,
some dominant outings potentially. But yeah,
he's going to draft him. You can't draft him at a point where you pick his starts, right? You can't. You just spend too much for him.
Right. That's to your point. Like, if it was Tanner Houck, you can draft him and pick his starts.
Right.
With Freddie Peralta, though, yeah, you're drafting him as probably your number 2. Getting him in as your number 3 is kind of a luxury, and that probably means you went earlier on pitching.
Yeah.
And it's just been hard to do. And I think people see he certainly has the strikeout upside. We've seen that. And he has potential starts where he's going to get a lot of strikeouts. Those tend to come earlier in the season, by the way, to the point. And, but he's also going to have some starts where he gives up 5-6 runs because, a couple walks and a home run lead to more damage than you'd like to see.
Yeah, the walks are so important. We pound on it. I think Major League Baseball is coming around to it and not following us, but I think that's their philosophy as well. Limit the walks as much as possible because it's so much easier to pitch when you're not walking guys.
Yeah, if I look back, we're talking about April, and you look back at his April last year, in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 starts, if you include his opening day start March 29th last year, he had 1 or fewer, or 4 of his 6 starts, he had 1 or fewer walks.
Love it. Yeah.
He didn't do that the rest of the season, though.
Right. Yeah.
The rest of the season, it was 2 or more in all but 1 start.
Yeah.
So,
and that's something a pitcher can control.
Yeah.
I mean, to a large extent. So what's going on there? Right.
Yeah.
That's all pinned on him. That's not, I mean, you could look at sample size and things like that, of course, but by the same token, walks are something pitchers can control. They can limit their walks if they want to.
Yeah, no question. And I mean, some of it comes from confidence and confidence in certain pitches. And we talk about the warmer weather, and that can be a factor. Is when it's the warmer weather and the hitters are more comfortable, you start dancing around that strike zone a little bit more, and you end up putting more guys on base.
I mean, I think he gave up 2 homers in that outing, but he has that 2-homer outing that 2-homer outing in May or something. Maybe it changes his philosophy in terms of strikeout. Maybe he starts to nibble a little bit more, and that's where the walks come from.
Yeah, and like I said, from mid-June on, he had 2 or more walks in every start but 1. So, he definitely had better control, command, probably both early in the season. And it got a little out of control. I mean, I talked about his ability to limit walks in the first month. Then May hit, May 5th, he had 6 walks in that first game of May. I mean, that's just one star. But
runs did he give up in that game?
He only gave up 3 runs because he didn't give up any homers.
Yep.
So,
lucky.
Yeah.
6 walks.
6 walks, yeah.
I just shuddered thinking about it. 6 walks.
I know. But yeah, he had 11 Ks twice last season, though. That was his season high, and that they came before June. Then after that, he didn't have a double-digit strikeout performance. So again, it's kind of one of those things where he does tend to pitch better early on, and a lot of it, to your point, is limiting the walks, and thereby the home runs are probably more likely to come later in the season anyways because of the warmer weather. So if you can limit the walks and limit the home runs, which he generally does early in the season, it's going to be a lot of success.
Well, this is all speculative, but once a player demonstrates a skill, he owns it. So if he can go out in April and May and not walk guys, and he starts to walk guys after that point, it's fear-based control issues. It's not mechanical control issues, right?
100%. And I think that's the case with Freddie Peralta. I think he's capable of not walking guys.
Yep.
I don't think it is that he's, wild. I think
a couple fly balls go out of the ballpark. He has some earth outings, and all of a sudden he doesn't want to come in on guys.
Yeah. So that's the thing that is worth monitoring, but it's hard start to start. And that's where, to your point, if you're in a head-to-head league, he can kill you on a given week.
Yeah.
If he has one of those where he gives up 5 walks and gives up 7 runs or something like that, that can be killer, especially for a guy that is one of probably your top 2 pitchers.
Right. And you can't afford not to pitch him. And you can't afford not to pitch him in August either.
No. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in a roto league, I think at the end of the season, you're going to get decent numbers from him.
Yep.
He's been consistent. I mean, he's
been
a
sub-4
ERA every year of his career going back to 2019 or going back to 2020, I should say.
And you always have the option of shopping him in June. Always
true.
And I think that's something with rotisserie leagues that we have to pay more attention to, because I've been talking about it for the last couple of years. There are more good young starters out there. There are more starters in the waiver pool. You can go in the middle of the season, pick out some guys on runs, get some quality starts, pick some starts, and development has speeded up so much with Driveline and with all these other third-party training facilities. I think we can look at young starters now and be more reliant on them. So it's like, if I can get something for Freddie Peralta in June, I'll trade him. I'll find something in the pool. I feel more and more confident every year that I can find something in the pool that's going to get me through.
Yeah, and this goes somewhat to the philosophy again of stock up on pitching early in the season, take advantage of your pitching early in the season, and then transition to more offense later in the season, especially in traditional roto leagues. And I think you have the opportunity to do that. And Freddie Peralta is a good example of that. If you did draft Peralta, fine, good. Roll him out there. At this point, you're rolling him out there every start, and then you may be able to shop him, because there are some people who look at him as ace-like or, 1B type guy. And so you can possibly take advantage, especially if he does continue to pitch well in April.
And in late May, there's going to be 3 guys in your league who are drooling over the prospect of Freddie Peralta, right?
Yeah.
That's the way things go at that point.
Especially
That's part of the whole strategy. There are going to be teams that are desperate for pitching.
Yeah. There's going to be injuries. There are going to be injuries, and there are going to be teams that maybe went a little thin on pitching in their drafts, and then they have an injury or two, and, you got to make a move, and it's better to do it in beginning of June or mid-June than, waiting too long.
Owners who have Garrett Cole and Tyler Glasnow and Jacob deGrom, like me.
Yeah. Oh man. That's
Well,
hey,
Jacob deGrom.
Jacob deGrom and Tyler Glasnow are healthy right now.
That's right.
We hope that they're going to be healthy throughout the season.
That's right. All right, let's start to the hitter side, and let's start with a couple of guys. I'm going to mix up the list a little bit because I want to start with a couple of guys that fit your through line of some of these guys are really good April performers, because that's when they're healthy. So let's start with Mike Trout.
Yeah, that's almost the through line through all the hitters is health to a certain degree. Trout has had just some ridiculous starts to seasons, even in recent years where he, I mean, early in his career, we don't even care about that because he was great every year, all
Right.
year.
Yeah.
But even in recent years where he has, struggled to stay on the field, when he's out there at the beginning of the year, he has just been incredible. And this year is another year. He is healthy right now. He is out there at the beginning of the year, so you could take advantage. A career 1001 OPS in March, April. 69 career homers in the month. It's the second most of any month in his career. But since 2021, 28 of his 76 total home runs have come before May.
Wow.
So, more than a third have come before May. He's hitting 308 since 2021, hitting 308 before May. And Mike Trout's no longer a 300 plus hitter, but he has been in March and April. And so, he has obviously struggled to stay on the field. When he has played, there has been more volatility, certainly, than there was earlier in his career. But when he starts the season healthy, he's Mike Trout. He's still the old Mike Trout. And so this is kind of one of those cases where, he's out there right now. I'd be riding him, and I would try to be even targeting him early in the season, and then try to move on before he gets hurt.
And they've got to the point where they moved him to right field this year, right? Try to keep him healthy. Why not just DH the guy?
I know, yeah. I mean, I think maybe that's a question of why or that he doesn't want a DH.
He's 33. I mean, he could spend some time at DH, or he could spend the majority of the time at DH.
I know. I mean, Mike Trout's still only 33. I mean, he still potentially has several good years left if he could just stay healthy. I think we all believe he still has the capability not to be the guy he was earlier in his career. He's hitting 312 with 40 homers, but I think he could still hit home runs.
He had 40 homers in 2022 on 438 at bats.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not that long ago. He can certainly provide 30 homers if he can stay healthy through the course of the year and stay healthy. And by healthy, I mean, we watch a lot of players who play dinged up all the time, and especially with hitters because of base injury or hand injury or wrist injury, sap your power to a very large extent, but they're still playing every day, so you don't see it. But if he could stay healthy for the course of the season and be Mike Trout, he could have a 30 homer season easily.
Yeah, I mean, he had 10 homers in 109 at bats last year before he got hurt. I mean, his batting average was low, 220, but the homers were there. He still has extraordinary power. And I mean, I would love to see a way for them to find, whether it's, DH or whatever. Again, maybe we think of Mike Trout as older just because he's had so many injuries and struggled to stay on the field for years now. But 33 years old, I mean, he could still, he's at 378 career home runs. I mean, 500 is still very possible.
Byron Buxton's only 31.
But he's in the body of a 90-year-old. No, he's not. I mean, the thing of it is Buxton, I was actually watching the Twins game on Friday. Maybe it was Friday, maybe it was Thursday. He still moves around. I mean, he still looks athletic. He struggles to stay healthy. But yeah, Buxton's a guy who's on this list. 3 of the last 4 seasons, Buxton has started out red hot. From 2021 to 2023, last year wasn't so much the case, but from 2021 to 2023, hit in the month of April, hit 315 with 21 homers, 45 runs, 42 RBIs in 57 games.
Yeah.
And he's just started out absolutely blistering hot, which is what happens, and everybody gets so excited about Buxton, right?
And that's in Minnesota, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody gets excited in fantasy, and you're trying to target Buxton, and then the knee injury happens, the hip injury happens, the whatever happens, and he misses time. But he's been really good to start the season. I still think, yeah, you mentioned he's 31 years old. Obviously, Buxton's had nothing close to the career Mike Trout's had, but to the point I was making with Trout is I still think he's capable of putting up big numbers. He just has struggled to stay on the field. But the power continues to be really good. I mean, his quality of contact every year is fantastic. When he's out there, he's never been a good plate discipline guy. Strikes out a lot, but he just absolutely hits the ball really hard. A double-digit barrel rate every year for the last 5 years. I still think there's the potential in that bat for 30 plus homers. He's never done it. Then again, he's never had more than 462 at bats, and that was in 2017. So I certainly think a full season of Buxton would see 30 plus homers. Whether we're going to get that full season of Buxton,
and his
highly
355 at bats last year was highest since then, right?
Yeah.
Since that 2017 season. See, Chris Sale ruined a lot of things for me last year because I'm the type of guy who's so susceptible to this. What if Mike Trout or Byron Buxton has that Chris Sale year where out of the blue, all of a sudden he's healthy, right? And
Yeah.
he was healthy. He wasn't healthy at the end, but he was healthy for the complete season. Can you imagine a year of Byron Buxton where he can just go out and give you 500 at bats?
And that's why he sucks me in every single year.
Same with me.
And the thing is with Buxton and Trout this year, the injuries were baked into their draft value, right?
Yep.
Buxton was going deep in drafts, and I get it. I mean, you're just not buying in more than like 350 at bats, and for that, you can't draft him as a top 4 outfielder. I mean, he's number 5, 6 outfielder, kind of was where he was going. At that value, I just kept buying in because it's like to have him as my number 5 outfielder, with the potential of what I think he's capable of, because I do think he still has a great bat. The stolen bases, it's because of the injuries. He just doesn't steal like he used to. Although I still think a full season, could he chip in double-digit steals? Yes. But again, that's in a full season, which we've really never seen from him.
But with the state of the outfield, especially in a medium depth league, 12 teams, and certainly if you get into 15, the depth of the outfield is ridiculous. You're getting a Byron Buxton, and you just consider him a handcuff. I'm going to get another player, and I'm just going to put something with him, and I'm going to get 30 homers out of that pair. It's not unreasonable that you could do that.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, and I can't remember. Sky has the saying with it. I'm gonna butcher it, but stay healthy, or either be healthy or
good. Be good. Either be good or be healthy. That's all.
Yeah,
yeah.
Be good or be hurt, right?
Be good or be hurt, right?
Yeah, and I think that's the thing with Buxton is, at the very least, you, depending on your format, if you have an IR spot, great, or an IL spot, great.
Right.
Just drop him on the IL and it's not like you're getting a 0. You put somebody else in there for him.
Yeah.
There's certain leagues now. I know people are into kind of these like gladiator leagues where everybody on your rosters who's starting, you don't have a bench. So this is a bit different if you have a Buxton in those leagues.
Right.
But in most leagues, you put them on the IL, you put them on your bench, or you drop them if it's a serious injury, and
you go get your handcuff.
Somebody else in there.
Yeah. Then you go get your handcuff and you're good.
Yeah, and then when he's out there, I still think Buxton's going to generally be pretty good. He's not going to give you a big batting average because he strikes out too much. But I do think the home runs, and again, he's never had more than 28 homers. So I get it. It's like people could look at it and be like, why are you talking about his home run potential when he's mostly a guy in the teens? It's really at bats. I'm just talking on a per at bat basis. He's got the power. Look at that quality of contact. That's very good quality of contact.
Outstanding, yes. And he's been a big subject here in Boston over the last couple of days because of Rafael Devers starting. There's been a lot of conversation about Rafi being moved to the DH position and whether he can mentally handle it and what the strains are of being a DH. And, when you fail as a DH, you fail in your whole job. You don't get to walk away from it out in the field to take grounders or get distracted. And Byron Buxton was kind of the poster child for this because in an article written locally, Buxton was talking about his time to the DH and how tough it was for him mentally, because again, it just wore on him. Just being all you're doing is hitting, and then you're just sitting around afterwards. If you go 0 for 3, you're just sitting around for the last hour of the game thinking I'm 0 for 3. And I've struck out a couple times and wondering whether Rafi's falling into that same thing. But I mean, that's just a situation where Buxton isn't going to the DH position to try to keep him healthy either because he doesn't like it.
Yeah, I mean, they tried it, and it was a disaster. I mean, he had his worst offensive season, and he still struggled to stay healthy. Last year, they said, we're just throwing you back out there in center field every day. And like you said, he still had injuries, but it was his most at-bats last year of any season besides 2017. So he was a little more healthy than he's been. He had a decent season. Again, I still think those home runs are capable of going up even higher, but he hit 279 last year. That was a career high. I don't expect anything close to that this year, but it was a nice batting average, plus 18 home runs and 7 stolen bases. So as the everyday center fielder, plus difference between Buxton and Devers is Buxton's still an elite fielder.
Yeah.
And so there's still an advantage when he is out there for his fielding ability. But you also open up the door to injuries in the outfield. But that's one of those things too, where like, I just think you can't look at Buxton's history of injuries and say it's because he plays the outfield.
No.
You know, you got to throw him out there and just let him do his thing.
Yep. And again, draft him at a good price, draft him with the understanding you're going to handcuff him and try to put together an outfield production from that one slot. Because like you said, he's not going to play hurt. He doesn't usually, his performance isn't diminished when he's on the field because he's playing dinged up. He's either hurt or he's good, right?
Yeah.
Like Skyler likes it. And that you can work with that a little bit.
Yeah, no, I love that philosophy too, because that's the way I am, the way I tend to draft. And it's changed a little bit in recent years, but these years, if a guy is healthy now, meaning in spring training or heading into the season, I'm willing to draft him, even if he's got the history of injuries. Because if he gets injured, then I've hopefully built enough depth that I'll just play somebody else that may not be as good as him, but I want him when he's out there. I'm a little more skeptical of guys who are already dealing with injuries.
Yeah, right.
But guys like Buxton, and this goes to the Chris Sale thing, is Chris Sale was healthy going into the season last year.
Yep.
And obviously anybody who took advantage of that, got the huge benefit. I could go back to when Carlos Rodón, I mean, he was injured year after year after year after year. And then finally he had a healthy spring and he was a beast for the White Sox before he ended up, bouncing around and then, signing the big deal with the Yankees. But Rodón was a guy you couldn't trust. I mean, he was an afterthought, but he did have finally a healthy spring. And it was like, okay, he's healthy, he's out there, and he had a great season.
I'm always very leery of pitchers who don't have healthy springs for a couple of different reasons. First of all, they're not healthy and it's early, but this is the way you're supposed to be your healthiest. Secondly, I think that spring routine and getting through the entire spring training and ramping up in a way that you're familiar with and you feel comfortable with is so important to pitchers at the start of the season and going forward. So I'm always leery of pitchers that don't get their complete full spring because they're dealing with some dead arm or some soreness or whatever they're dealing with. That always makes me a little nervous.
That's the thing with DeGrom this year is DeGrom finally healthy in a spring, right? And so I have a bunch of shares of DeGrom. Am I anticipating because he was healthy in spring, he's going to have Chris Sale's season last year? No. Am I still anticipating some injuries? Yes. But I'm much more comfortable taking a chance on DeGrom this year than I have been in the last couple of years where he's been injured early on. George Kirby's a guy, to your point, where hasn't been healthy. He's expected back here in the next, sometime in April, but it does scare me a little bit. So I've really been avoiding Kirby until the very last draft I did, which was the Monday before opening day. It was my last draft. And he slipped so far.
Exactly. Yep.
And I just at some point said, you know what, I got it. I got to do it. So I have Kirby on that. I think that's my only share of Kirby. But it does scare me, but it just, the value is so ridiculous at that point.
All right. Brandon Marsh is on this list. Brandon Marsh is a guy that I had my eye on all through the draft. Didn't end up with him because I waited a little bit too long, but he was just a guy on my list. You set up your little queue of guys that you're looking for at a particular point in the draft. Brandon Marsh was one of those guys for me.
Brandon Marsh is always my guy year after year because I love his skill set. Quality contact every year is fantastic.
Yeah, outstanding last year in 23, and it was outstanding. Last year it was outstanding.
Yeah, I mean, really hits the ball well. He strikes out a bunch. His strikeout rate's really high, and yet his swinging strike rate isn't that high. It's kind of interesting. About a 10.3, 10.4% swinging strike rate each of the last 2 seasons, but his strikeout rate is over 30%. So he strikes out
sub 30 chase too. So he's not, doesn't have trouble zoning up and making contact, but he's striking out. Is it just aggression, you think?
I think, yeah, he doesn't shorten up on 2 strikes,
Yeah.
and it just keeps going. But either way, you look at that quality of contact, it's so enticing. The fact that he does strike out a lot, but you feel like it's not that he can't make contact. He's got a okay contact rate around 75%.
Yep.
He has steals in there. He's got good speed. It's not elite, but he's, 15 to 20 stolen base type guy. So I just love his abilities, or his skills, I should say, and the fact that he can be a 4 category guy. I don't think he's ever going to be a great batting average guy, but certainly offers power and speed. Now in March and April, career 142 WRC plus in March, April, 890 OPS, 244 ISO. So those are some of the advanced metrics. Those are great. In 2024, last year, 6 of his 16 total home runs were hit in the first month of the season. In 2023, he hit 329 with 4 of 12 total home runs. So he's at his best early in the season. Another guy who deals with injuries. He gets nicked up. He tends to miss some time here and there. He's at 400 plus at bats each of the last 3 seasons, but right around 400 because he does miss time typically. Somewhat of a platoon guy there, but
I was going to say, which is the reason for the limited at bats? Is it because of he nicks himself up, or because he has platoon issues?
I think it's more the nicks himself up. He somewhat platoons, but he still will get at bats against lefties. It is not every single time that he is going to be benched against a lefty, but he is much better against righties than lefties. So it's understandable, but I still think that the other option for the Phillies is Johan Rojas, who would typically be the guy that would go in for Marsh against lefties. And Johan Rojas just isn't that good.
Yeah.
It's just Marsh is better against the lefty. Plus, he's an elite fielder. So I think the Phillies try to get him in there. But yes, I think part of the, he's not going to be a guy who's going to have 600 at bats. I think a fully healthy season, though, he could still get to like around 500. And that could be a 2020 season. I mean, last year, 16 homers, 19 stolen bases, and 418 at bats. He gets 500 at bats. That's a 2020 season.
And in the context of the outfield in the mid 2020s, that's pretty damn good.
Yeah, and I mean, really, you can get Marsh so late in drafts, or draft season's over, but you could get him. So I tend to always have a lot of shares of Marsh. Now you got to deal with the ups and downs of that. Obviously, a strikeout rate that I still feel like can get lower because of the things we pointed out before, and struggles against lefties, and the fact that he tends to spend a time or 2 on the IL every year. But I really think he has great upside still. I think there's a higher ceiling for him. He's still only 27 years old. He's in a good ballpark and a good lineup. He hits at the end of the lineup. But again, you turn that lineup around if he's hitting 8th or 9th, and he's followed up by Trey Turner, Kyle Schwarber, Bryce Harper. I mean, those are the guys following him. So a lot of opportunities to score runs, even though he's at the bottom of the lineup.
He's always a tough decision for me, because with those 400 at bats, or 450 at bats, or 424 at bats, you're going to need another outfielder. It's going to cost you another roster spot. And his price usually just doesn't get low enough to deal with that. Like we're getting him in later rounds, or supplemental rounds, or as a reserve, or things like that. You can't get him at that price because he's damn good. But you need the extra outfielder with those 400 at bats. So that's always the equation for me, and why I end up waiting usually too long for him.
Yeah. For me, I spend so much time during draft season focusing on those guys who can offer both power and speed, both at the top of the draft and at the back end of the draft. I think that's always been my philosophy, is not just trying to get those 5 category power speed guys early in the draft. Yeah, you want them, the big boppers in the first couple rounds, but I'm trying to look for them later in the draft. And Brandon Marsh is always the guy who stands out to me as we get deeper into the drafts, as one of the few guys remaining that, like I said, literally could hit 2020 this year if he just could get to 500 at bats.
And 2020 counts the same with 400 at bats as it does with 600 at bats.
Yeah, and if you can get that guy, deeper in the draft as your fourth, fifth outfielder, maybe even possibly sixth, depending on how you do it, that's just huge, especially in standard roto leagues.
I'm with you. I'm chasing speed later in the draft, especially in the outfield, and it gets me into trouble sometimes with that balance of power and speed in the outfield because you still have to get some power in there. And I tend to okay getting stolen bases, and then I look and go, oh, I need a little bit of pop in here somewhere.
It's funny how things have changed, right?
Really?
There were a few years there during the juice ball era where you could get 30 home run guys in round like 25.
Yep.
You don't have that potential anymore. And so yeah, you tend to, and I've been that way too, is tend to seek out not the elite stolen base guys, they're gone by that point, but the guys who can get you 15 to 20 steals,
Exactly.
like Brandon Marsh.
Yeah.
So
And
just a guy who has a really nice skill set.
pre the rule changes, we used to get 2 or 3 stolen base guys, and then we were done. And then we just would go get power and production. The game has changed so much, and it's like you got to.
I like it better this way.
I do. I love it. I love this. I love the baseball the way it is right now. I think they're doing really well.
And I love in fantasy that we're back to those 5 category guys.
Yep.
We're back. There was just a few seasons there. Well, more than a few seasons where you didn't even care about the stolen bases drafting. I was like, I'll just get them throughout the draft, at some point, but it wasn't like a target. Well, now we've gone back to, in those first couple rounds, you really got to nail those 5 category guys. And I just think it has made the drafts a lot more fun.
All right, let's go to Adley Rutschman here. And the first thing that always stands out to me when I see Adley Rutschman is the amount of at-bats he gets. And that's what you want out of a catcher, right?
Yeah, no question about it. Obviously he started off red hot too with a couple home runs on opening day. And that continues a trend for Adley. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it, 571 at bats last year, 588 at bats. This is a guy who typically will play designated hitter. When he's not catching, and that's just such a huge advantage at the catching position. And why, even though he maybe had an underwhelming season last year, hit 250 with 19 home runs, he's still considered one of the top 3 catchers, for offensive purposes. In March, April, hit 322. Last year, he hit 322 with 4 homers. After April, hit 232 with 15 homers. So 4 of his 19 homers came in the first month, hit 322 versus 232 the rest of the season. And then in 2023, hit 291 with 4 homers and hit below 250 the rest of the season. So he has been much better at the beginning of the season. This isn't an injury prone guy, but again, as a catcher, wears on you as the season moves on. Your body probably breaks down a little bit more, but he's been really good to start the season and really good so far this season.
That's basically the answer, isn't it? I mean, we had 104 games at catcher, 104 games at catcher in 2023, 99 games at catcher last year in 2024. It's going to wear you down, just the way it works.
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons I've had this discussion before is when they took Rutschman, I still advocated for, should he just be a third baseman or an outfielder?
Yep.
But I get it. He is an elite catcher. I mean, one of the best in the game, at the catcher position. But he's got so much upside offensively, and we're never really probably going to see that upside, which the Orioles might say that's okay because we get the upside behind the plate.
Right.
It doesn't matter for fantasy purposes, but
Plus, they have enough offensive talent. They don't
True.
need him to be what he could be.
True.
Right.
Yeah, it's true. I just we'll note, we'll see where things end up with Adley Rutschman by the end of his career. But I'm telling you, just if he played the outfield, I mean, this could be a 300 perennial 300 guy with 30 homers. I don't think we're going to see that because of the position he plays.
Put him at
I
first
think
base. They don't have a first baseman. That's all that you'd worry about. So put him at first base.
Yeah.
Keep him healthy. Let him stroke.
I agree. That would be my way of going about it. I mean, there have been a couple guys who have, kind of proved me wrong. Buster Posey, was a
sort of.
Sort of, but he probably could have been a lot better offensively, right?
He definitely could have been. Yeah. Joe Mauer.
Sal Perez.
Sal Perez. Well, Sal Perez is a different animal.
He is, and he's a massive guy who's really
Sal.
been impressive with that. But I just wonder, even as good as those guys have been,
yeah,
probably could have been better.
Yep.
I mean, Joe Mauer is a great example. Joe Mauer was an elite hitter.
Yeah.
His numbers don't jump off the page to you just if you compare him against other great hitters.
And they finally moved him, but they moved him too late.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, that was after. And yeah, I mean, Buster Posey's a guy, Hall of Famer. He'll be in the Hall of Fame. He was a great defensive catcher and, won 3 championships. He did great things there. Had a great career. Offensively, he had some really good seasons. Never as the ceiling was never reached offensively for what I think Buster Posey was capable of.
And we're talking as fantasy people. When you're in the clubhouse and you're understanding what Rutschman is to that pitching staff, or what Mauer was to that pitching staff, or what Posey was to that pitching staff, there's value there that we don't care about.
Right.
We don't see all that clearly, and we don't care about it. We just want the offensive production, right?
So, right. And that's the thing.
Trade-off that the teams make because they know something.
Right. And then, we talk a lot about better real life player than a fantasy player. That certainly is Adley Rutschman. Right. I mean, he's such a crucial part of the Orioles, and he's a great player. And, even offensively for a catcher, he still puts up very good numbers. And to your point, he plays a lot for a catcher, which is of huge value for fantasy owners. So he still should be drafted as a top 3 catcher and was. But I think people don't realize necessarily how good of an offensive talent he is. I mean, incredible offensive talent. We're never going to probably see that elite level of what he's capable of unless it's I'm shocked and at some point they move him off of catcher, which I don't think they're going to do.
By the way, where would he fit in the first base world these days?
Qualified
first baseman.
Absolutely, he'd be an elite first baseman.
All right, we're running a little long on time here. Lamont Wade, Brandon Nimmo, Joe Connor. You want to do lightning round on them, or is there one in particular you want to hit on?
These are guys who also have had injuries. I know, like Connor Joe, we don't have to talk about. He's been insane how good he's been early in the seasons, but the Padres sent him down. Keep him up for 1 month.
They need a little bit more analytics. They need to figure this out.
I know they should have talked to me. So we'll ignore Connor Joe, even though he's been ridiculous in the beginning of seasons. Lamont Wade, career 155 WRC plus in March, April. You don't think of Lamont Wade as a 155 WRC plus guy. 905 OPS in his career with a 196 ISO. He's been really good early in seasons. Nimmo, a guy who's certainly dealt with his injuries. And I think when he's healthy, you take advantage of it. But he's got a 140 career WRC plus in March and April. Since 2021, he's hit 285, 10 homers, 7 stolen bases, only 259 in all other months. So he's been better early in the season, healthy.
People are going to push back on that. They're going to say, what are you talking about? 580 at bats, 592, 571 last year. He plays. He's the Dustin Pedroia poster child of the concept of you can be unhealthy and still playing. Right.
Yeah, totally.
What he could do if he was 100% all the time.
Yeah. I think Nimmo, I not in the exact same parallel to what we were talking about with Rutschman, but I think Nimmo is a guy that is capable of a lot more than we typically see from him. But I think his body just isn't, it's like never really, he's always dealing with something.
Yeah.
But to your point, he plays, but he just always seems to have some sort of nagging injury, product of being in the outfield and running around and
product of being 31 or 32.
Yeah, exactly. But he's good earlier in the season when his body is probably at its best. Although he dealt with some nagging injuries in spring, so maybe he's not 100% right now.
He just turned 32 on Thursday. Happy birthday, Brandon!
Happy birthday, Brandon Nimmo.
Yeah. So we're not going to get a full season of him at 100%, but he's productive. So it really doesn't matter. But just be aware of get him in the lineup.
Yeah. And Lamont Wade's a guy that we talk about the first base position. Typically, we wouldn't talk about a guy like Lamont Wade, but I think in deeper leagues, he's been a good number 2 first baseman for me as a backup first baseman. I like Lamont Wade. He tends to play regularly. I'm probably higher on him than others. I think he's got a decent skill set. Not the upside that we talk about with some other guys, but I do think that there's some upside there. And again, earlier in the season, he's been particularly good. So I know nobody's jumping over themselves to get Lamont Wade, but I tended to have him on a lot of my teams, and maybe that's a mistake of mine. But
Well, what you're doing is if you get into that trouble in the middle or bottom of first base, you need a backup plan. Hopefully he plays outfield too. We've got some position versatility, which Lamont Wade does. And those guys are great to have on your bench, especially with daily transactions and things like that. So he's a valuable guy to have around. He's not going to get a ton of at bats, but you don't need him if you're working him in that role. Just play him when he's in the lineup and he's going to produce for you.
yeah, and typically early on, again, those home runs come early for Lamont Wade. He's got good quality of contact. Last year, 90.5 average exit velocity, 90.5 mile per hour average exit velocity, 43.7% hard hit rate, almost a double digit barrel rate. So he's got some good quality of contact. He makes good contact overall. He's a solid player. Nothing jumps way off the page at you, but when he's out there, he's going to put up decent numbers for you.
All right, that's it for us. You can find our podcast wherever you found this podcast, of course, on YouTube and on Facebook as well. And you can find it at insideofbaseball.com. You can just go there. It's free to non-subscribers, this podcast, as well as some articles and some samples of the stuff we send out to people on a daily basis who are subscribers to the program. So if you're new to us, insideofbaseball.com and the baseball blog is a great place to go. There's a lot of information. Even if you're not a subscriber, you'll find some useful stuff. Brandon, have a good day. We'll talk to you next time.
All right. Sounds good. Take care.
Oh, yeah. Let's go.